So Brussels is the heart of the European Union, and this is where all major policy decisions for Europe are made. And it's also where the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is today to get funding for his war. But just outside of the European Parliament building, there's another battle that is brewing. Hundreds of European farmers have brought their tractors just outside of the building, and clashes have erupted between the farmers and the police guarding the EU lawmakers. Our next report tells you more.
Skirmishes erupted outside the European Parliament today. The police on one side, European farmers on the other. The police had tear gas and water cannons. The farmers had stones, fireworks, and potatoes. And the farmers didn't hold back. They lit a fire at Luxembourg Square, just outside the European Parliament building. They hurled tear gas canisters right back at the police. And all the while, their tractors loudly played a number of jingles. The reason for this outpouring of agrarian anger is a deal that's being negotiated between the European Union and Mercosur. Mercosur consists of 5 South American countries: Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia. The deal would gradually remove trade duties on almost all goods from the South American nations coming into the EU, and this extends to agricultural products as well. That's why European farmers are furious.
The Mercosur deal is really bad for our agriculture because it's going to import stuff that we can produce here with better quality, with less phytopharmaceutical products, products that are forbidden here but are allowed over there. And it's a question of health for the citizens of Europe, but also a question of future at all levels for our farmers.
The European farmers believe that their produce will be priced out of the market once cheap agricultural goods start pouring in from South America. They are also furious because of a lack of a level playing field. They say South American farmers do not face as many restrictions as they do. Restrictions on the chemicals and pharmaceuticals they can use on their farms. The European farmers say that EU markets will be flooded with cheap, unsafe products. And it will kill their livelihoods. That is why they are protesting. The EU-Mercosur deal has been under negotiation for 25 years. If it gets ratified, the deal would impact about 780 million people in both the EU and the Mercosur nations. EU lawmakers voted to advance the deal on Tuesday by adding some safeguards and concessions for European farmers. But clearly, the farmers aren't convinced.
You can see all around me farmers from across the European Union enraged about a new free trade deal between the EU and the Mercosur countries of South America. They're here in Brussels blocking roads with tractors, firing fireworks, throwing potatoes, as well as eggs of the police who are responding with tear gas and water cannon. You can see behind me here one of the main symbols of this protest, which is angry farmers. For years, they have led protests against deals like this and what they say are threats to their very way of life. Proponents say that it'll be a great boon for the European Union, especially as it is being squeezed by the rare earth export controls by China, as well as the tariffs from the Trump administration.
All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Mr. James Jackson, who's a journalist and a political analyst, and he's joining us live on WION. Mr. Jackson, thank you very much indeed for joining us here. Now, these are some pretty dramatic scenes that we are witnessing out of Brussels. This deal between EU and Mercosur was apparently was in the works for more than a couple of decades. Give us a sense of why the farmers, the French farmers especially, are so furious at the prospect that this deal could be ratified.
Effectively, this is the same thing that we've seen around farmers' protests throughout the last couple of years. Farmers are a heavily protected industry in the European Union, that especially French farmers, through the common agricultural policy, have for decades been subsidized and protected from real market competition. And ultimately, Mercosur is aiming, the free trade deal with Mercosur is aiming to allow access of the European market to with the South American market. And ultimately, this could result in lower food prices, which many Europeans would be very happy about, given the inflation which has been going through. It could also help with economic growth. The continent of Europe is not doing fantastically economically, particularly in the last few years. A lot of the powerhouses, such as France and Germany, have had very little growth in almost a decade, in Germany's case. And EU leaders are looking for reasons and ways to actually help growth and help different industries to thrive. Of course, the farmers will probably suffer from this. They might not make as much money, but in many cases, it's not an industry which is particularly profitable, and is heavily subsidized. And, a lot of Europeans might ask, why do we want to subsidize farmers so much if we can get better quality or cheaper goods from other parts of the world?
Some interesting arguments there. Now, one of the reasons as to why this deal is being spoken of within the European Union circles is because they want to increase access to overseas markets in the back of Donald Trump's tariffs that have been imposed, and also because of increased competition from China. Why is it that the European leaders are failing in convincing the farmers that possibly this deal, free trade agreement with Mercosur, would be good for the European nations at large, even if the farmers were to suffer in the short term? How much do the European farmers stand to lose here?
I think European farmers and the interests of the European people are actually quite different things. Ultimately, the European nations might be happy about this. It might bring some economic growth. It could potentially bring food prices down, which have risen dramatically in the last few years due to causing a cost of living crisis. But the farmers are a heavily organized protectionist group. I mean, you can see the pictures there in front of you. They're actually blockading in tractors. Now, that often gives, this is a common tactic. We've seen it in Berlin. We've seen it in Paris. Lobbing potatoes is actually nothing compared to what they sometimes do of even putting manure in front of ministers, as I believe has happened in Belgium before, in front of ministries. But it's not that many people, actually, because the tractors themselves are very big. So farmers often have an outsized impact. Their protests have an outsized impact because of these tractors and because they are seen as a very tightly organized lobby. But ultimately, as a politician, sometimes you have to take on lobbies and ignore them. And ultimately, the interests of the farmers may not align with the interests of Europeans at large.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. James Jackson, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thanks.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.